The dust-laden wind carried the sound of a child's weak cries across the barren plains of Montana Territory, 1876, where Katherine Walsh knelt in the hard dirt outside her dilapidated cabin, desperately trying to coax something edible from the withered garden that had once promised so much. Her calloused hands trembled as she dug deeper, searching for a single potato that might have survived the drought, while inside, her 3 children waited with hollow cheeks and eyes that had long ago stopped sparkling with childish wonder. Katherine wiped sweat from her brow, leaving a streak of dirt across her once beautiful face. At 32, hardship had etched premature lines around her eyes and mouth, though nothing could fully diminish the quiet dignity that kept her spine straight even as hunger gnawed at her belly. The past winter had claimed her youngest, little Sarah, just 4 years old, whose tiny grave lay beneath the oak tree that provided the only shade for miles. Katherine's husband Jacob had left 2 years earlier, promising to find work in the gold fields and send money back. His letters had stopped coming 8 months ago. Inside the cabin, 6-year-old Emma's coughs punctuated the heavy silence. Katherine's heart clenched. The coughing had started 3 days ago, and with no medicine and precious little food, she feared this child might follow her sister to the lonely graveyard. "Mama," 10-year-old Thomas appeared in the doorway, his trousers hanging loose on his thin frame. "Did you find anything?" Katherine forced a smile. "Not yet, my brave boy, but there's still plenty of ground to search." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. She had searched every inch of this failing garden a dozen times, but what could she tell him? That they would go hungry again tonight. That his sister's illness would only worsen without nourishment. Thomas nodded solemnly, his eyes too old for his face. "I can help." "No, sweetheart, Emma needs you." Katherine straightened, wincing at the pain in her back. "I'm going to check the traps." Perhaps God has blessed us with a rabbit today. But the traps were empty, as they had been for weeks. The drought had driven most wildlife far from these parts, leaving the land as barren as her hopes. Katherine stood at the edge of her property, gazing toward the distant mountains. Once, she had seen this land as a promise of fresh start after leaving behind her life in Philadelphia. Jacob had painted such beautiful pictures of their future here. Fields of wheat, a proper farm, children growing strong on fresh air and homegrown food. Now all that remained of those dreams was dust. A faint sound caught her attention, the distant rhythm of hoofbeats. Katherine squinted against the setting sun, making out a lone rider approaching along the rough trail that passed near their cabin. Visitors were rare in this isolated stretch, and experience had taught her caution. She hurried back to the cabin, ushering Thomas inside. "Stay with Emma, keep the door closed." She reached for the old rifle that hung above the fireplace, Jacob's parting gift. It held only 2 bullets, saved for the direst emergency. Katherine positioned herself on the porch, rifle not quite raised but ready. The rider drew closer, and she could make out the broad shoulders of a man atop a magnificent chestnut stallion. He wore the practical garb of a cowhand, dusty hat pulled low, bandana around his neck, weathered leather vest over a work shirt. His approach was unhurried, non-threatening, but Katherine remained vigilant. The stranger reined in his horse about 20 feet from the cabin. "Afternoon, madam," he called, his voice deep and clear. "I don't mean to intrude. Name's Matthew Vance. I'm looking for the Reynolds place. Was told it might be in these parts." Katherine kept the rifle visible. "You're about 5 miles east of Reynolds' land. This is Walsh property." The man, Matthew, nodded respectfully. Then his eyes swept over the failing garden, the thin smoke from the chimney, and Katherine's worn dress. Something in his expression shifted, not to pity but to understanding. "Been a hard season," he remarked, not a question but an acknowledgement. Katherine said nothing. Pride was nearly all she had left. Matthew swung down from his horse, moving slowly to show he meant no harm. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 35, with sun-browned skin and lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of squinting against harsh light. His beard was neatly trimmed, dark brown like his hair, with threads of silver at the temples. "I've been riding since dawn," he said. "Mind if I water my horse before heading on?" It was a simple request, one no decent person would refuse, yet Katherine hesitated. The well was running low and every drop was precious, but the horse looked tired and the man's eyes held no malice. "The well's around back," she said finally. "Help yourself. Much obliged." Matthew led his horse toward the well, then paused. "Couldn't help but notice your garden's struggling. This drought's been merciless." "We manage," Katherine said stiffly. A child's cough drifted through the cabin window, and Matthew's gaze flicked toward the sound. Katherine tensed, tightening her grip on the rifle. "Got little ones, I take it?" he asked. "My children are no concern of yours, Mr. Vance." Matthew raised his hand slightly. No offense meant. He continued to the well, drew water for his horse, and let the animal drink deeply. Katherine remained on the porch, watching. When he finished, Matthew reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a package wrapped in oilcloth. "Madam, I've got more provisions than I need for my journey. Would be a kindness if you'd take some off my hands, lighten my load," Katherine bristled. "We don't accept charity, not offering charity." His voice remained even. "Offering a fair trade. I noticed your roof could use some work. I'm handy with tools and have time before dark. Food for labor business arrangement, plain and simple." Emma's coughing fit grew louder inside the cabin. Katherine wavered, pride warring with the desperate needs of her children. "What's in the package?" she asked finally. "Jerky, hard tack, some dried apples." And he hesitated, then added, "A bit of honey for that cough I'm hearing." The mention of honey, a luxury Katherine couldn't remember the last time her children had tasted, broke through her resistance. "There are holes in the northwest corner," she said quietly. "If you can patch them before nightfall, I'll accept your trade." Matthew's smile was warm but respectful. "Yes, madam, I'll get right to it." As he worked on the roof, Katherine prepared a thin stew with some of the jerky he'd provided. The meat, combined with their last onion and a handful of wild greens she'd gathered that morning, produced the first substantial meal they'd had in days. The children's eyes widened at the scent. "Is that meat, Mama?" Emma asked weakly from her bed. "Yes, darling. A kind traveler traded with us. And look, he's given us honey for your throat." Emma's pale face brightened as Katherine offered a small spoonful of the amber liquid. Thomas watched solemnly, always making sure his sister got her share first, a child carrying an adult's burden. Outside, Katherine heard Matthew moving efficiently across the roof, hammering loose shingles and patching holes. As dusk approached, he climbed down the ladder he'd brought from his horse's pack. "Should hold tight now, even against a good rain," he reported, wiping his hands on a rag. "Noticed your woodpile's getting low. If you're amenable, I could fell a couple of those dead trees on the edge of your property before I move on tomorrow." Katherine studied him carefully. "You're welcome to camp here tonight in return for your help. But I'm curious why a man would go out of his way for strangers." Matthew's expression grew distant. "I was raised to believe a man's measure is how he treats those who can offer him nothing in return." He glanced at the small grave beneath the oak tree, then back to Katherine. "And I know what it is to lose someone to hunger and sickness." The simple honesty in his voice made Katherine's carefully constructed walls tremble. She nodded once, then gestured to the stew pot. "There's food if you'd like to join us." That evening was the first time in months that laughter echoed within the cabin walls. Matthew told stories that captivated the children, tales of buffalo herds that stretched to the horizon, of friendly Indian tribes who taught him to read the stars, of cities back east where buildings touched the clouds. Thomas peppered him with questions, while Emma, revived by the honey and sustenance, listened with wide eyes. After the children were asleep, Katherine and Matthew sat on the porch in the cool night air. He rolled a cigarette but asked her permission before lighting it. "Where are you headed?" she asked, watching the smoke curl into the starlit sky. "Cattlemen's Association hired me to help with a drive up to Helena. They're bringing in 3,000 head from Wyoming territory. Good money if you don't mind the dust and danger." "You've done this before," Matthew nodded. "Since I was 16. Started as a wrangler, worked my way up. Now I'm a trail boss when the season's right. Rest of the time I take odd jobs, ranch work, breaking horses, whatever keeps me moving." "Always moving," Katherine observed. "No place to call home." Something flickered in his eyes. "Had a place once. Lost it in '67, bad drought, worse than this one. Bank took everything." He tapped ash from his cigarette. "Your husband gone looking for work?" The direct question startled her, but Katherine found herself answering truthfully. "Gold fields, 2 years ago." "Letters stopped coming last winter." She swallowed hard. "I don't know if he's dead or just found something better than this." Matthew was quiet for a long moment. A man who'd leave his family to hunger didn't deserve them in the first place. The harshness of his judgment should have offended her, but instead, Katherine felt a strange relief at hearing spoken aloud what she'd been afraid to think. "The children keep asking when he's coming back," she admitted. "I've stopped knowing what to tell them." "Truth is usually best, even when it hurts," Matthew said gently. "Children understand more than we give them credit for." They sat in companionable silence until the cigarette burned down to nothing. Matthew stood to retire to his bedroll by the campfire he'd built. "Mr. Vance," Katherine called as he descended the porch steps. "Thank you not just for the food but for bringing some light back to this place." Matthew tipped his hat. "Get some rest, Mrs. Walsh. Tomorrow's another day." True to his word, Matthew spent the next morning cutting and splitting enough wood to last a month. Katherine watched from the garden, where she was planting seeds he'd given her hardy varieties that might survive even in this punishing soil. The children had taken to him immediately, Thomas following him like a shadow, learning to stack wood properly, while Emma sat nearby making chains from wildflowers. By midday, Matthew had loaded his horse and prepared to leave. "Reynolds will be wondering where I am," he explained. "Got to report in before heading to the rendezvous point." Katherine nodded, ignoring the hollow feeling spreading in her chest. One day of kindness couldn't change their circumstances. Once he rode away, they would still face the same struggles, the same uncertainties. Matthew reached into his saddlebag once more and pulled out a small pouch. "For the children," he said, handing it to her, "bit of sugar candy," and he hesitated, then produced a folded paper. "Map to my camp. I'll be there for 3 weeks, gathering cattle before the drive. If you need anything at all, you can find me." "That's very kind, but Mrs. Walsh," he interrupted gently, "I know pride is sometimes all a person has to hold on to, but pride won't feed your children." His eyes were serious. "I'm not offering charity, I'm offering a neighbor's hand. That's how folks survive out here, looking out for each other." Before Katherine could respond, Thomas came running from the cabin. "Are you leaving, Mr. Vance?" The disappointment in the boy's voice was palpable. Matthew knelt to eye level with the child. "Got to for now, partner. But I'll tell you what, I might need a good assistant when I come back through, someone who knows how to stack wood just right." Thomas straightened. "I can do that. I know you can." Matthew ruffled the boy's hair, then swung onto his horse. "Take care of your mama and sister." As he turned his horse toward the trail, Matthew looked back at Katherine. "Remember what I said. Pride's a poor companion on cold nights." They watched until horse and rider disappeared over the distant rise. Katherine clutched the map in one hand, the candy pouch in the other, torn between gratitude and uncertainty. That night, as the children slept with the sweet taste of candy still on their lips, Katherine unfolded the map in the dim lamplight. It wasn't just a crude drawing of directions to his camp, it was a detailed rendering of the surrounding territory, with notes about where to find wild onions, which streams still had water, which ranches might hire day labor. It was a map of survival, drawn by someone who understood their precarious position all too well. Katherine traced the careful lines with her fingertip, remembering the steady hands that had drawn them. Matthew Vance had given them more than food and repairs, he had given them possibility. In a world that had taken so much, that gift was beyond measure. 3 days later, Emma's cough worsened dramatically. The honey was gone, and the child burned with fever, her small chest heaving with each labored breath. Katherine bathed her with cool water from the well, whispered prayers into her hair, and felt terror rising like floodwater. "Mama, is Emma going to heaven like Sarah did?" Thomas asked, his voice small in the darkness of night. Katherine pulled him close. "No, my love, Emma is strong like you. We just need medicine." She made a decision then, looking at the map tucked beneath her pillow. "Tomorrow we're going to find help." Before dawn, Katherine loaded the wagon with what few possessions they could carry: clothes, blankets, Jacob's rifle, the last of the food. She wrapped Emma in quilts and placed her in the back, instructing Thomas to keep his sister comfortable. With a silent prayer, she urged their old mare forward, following the route Matthew had marked. The journey was slow and grueling. The wagon wheels caught in ruts, the mare tired easily, and Emma's condition deteriorated with each passing hour. By afternoon, Katherine was fighting panic, wondering if she'd made a fatal mistake in leaving the cabin. Then, as they crested a rise, she saw it a sprawling camp nestled in a valley with dozens of tents, chuck wagons, and a sea of cattle grazing on the surrounding plains. Cowboys on horseback moved among the herd, their calls carrying on the wind. A tendril of hope unfurled in Catherine's chest. She urged the mare forward, and as they approached the camp's edge, a sentry rider spotted them and raised a hand in greeting. "State your business, madam," he called, reining his horse alongside the wagon. "I'm looking for Matthew Vance," Katherine replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "My daughter is ill and needs help." The young cowboy's expression softened. "The boss, he's out with the north herd, should be back by sundown." He glanced at Emma's feverish form. "But looks like you need help now. Follow me to the cook tent. Old Doc Murphy's there, and he knows more medicine than most proper doctors." The camp burst into activity at their arrival. Doc Murphy, a grizzled former Army surgeon, immediately took charge of Emma while the camp cook pressed hot coffee and stew into Catherine's hands. Thomas was whisked away by a kindly older cowhand who promised to show him the gentle horses. "Pneumonia, most like," Doc Murphy declared after examining Emma. "Caught it in time, though, got medicines that'll help, but she needs rest and good food." He looked Catherine over with a professional eye. "Same as her mother, I'd wager." Catherine couldn't argue. The weeks of semi-starvation had taken their toll, leaving her lightheaded and weak. As the sun began to set, a commotion at the edge of camp signaled the return of the riders. Catherine stood, shading her eyes against the glare, searching for Matthew among the approaching men. He saw her before she spotted him, his horse breaking from the group, galloping toward the medical tent where she stood. Matthew dismounted in a fluid motion, concern etched across his features. "Katherine, what's happened?" The sound of her given name on his lips, not Mrs. Walsh, but Katherine broke something within her. The tears she'd been holding back for months spilled over. "Emma's sick. I didn't know where else to go." Matthew's hand on her shoulder was steady, grounding. "You did right. We've got the best camp doctor in the territory." He glanced into the tent. "How is she?" "Fever's high, but Doc says she'll recover with proper care." Katherine wiped her tears with trembling hands. "I'm sorry to impose." "Don't," Matthew said firmly. "You're not imposing. You're accepting help that's freely given." His eyes held hers. "I told you out here we look after each other." That night, Katherine slept in a proper bed for the first time in years, a cot in the medical tent beside Emma's, while Thomas bunked with the younger cowhands who treated him like a visiting prince. She woke at dawn to find Matthew sitting beside Emma, spooning broth between the child's lips. "Her fever broke an hour ago," he said quietly. "Doc says she's turning the corner." Katherine sat up, relief washing through her. "Thank God." She watched Matthew's gentle handling of her daughter. "You've done this before." A shadow crossed his face. "Had a daughter once, Clara. She was 4 when the fever took her." "I'm sorry," Katherine whispered, understanding now why he'd been so determined to help them. "And your wife?" "Eliza couldn't bear to stay after Clara died, went back east to her family." His voice was matter of fact, but Katherine heard the old pain beneath the words. "Can't blame her. Nothing harder than losing a child." "No," Katherine agreed, thinking of Sarah's tiny grave. "Nothing harder." Over the next week, Emma's strength returned steadily. The camp embraced Katherine and her children as if they'd always belonged there. Thomas thrived in the company of the cowboys, learning to throw a lasso and help with the horses. Katherine found purpose assisting the camp cook and mending clothes for men who handled a branding iron better than a needle. And Matthew was a revelation. He ran the camp with quiet authority, respected by the roughest cowboys and the wealthiest cattle owners alike. In the evenings, he would sit with Katherine by the main fire, talking of small things and large, the year's beef prices, the changing politics back east, books they had both read in another life. "What will you do after the cattle drive?" Katherine asked one night, 10 days after their arrival. Emma was sleeping soundly now in one of the supply wagons that had been converted to comfortable quarters for them. Matthew poked at the fire with a stick. "Same as always, I suppose. Find work for the winter. Maybe head to Texas when spring comes." "Always moving," she echoed their conversation from that first night. "It's what I know." He looked at her across the flames. "What about you? Will you return to your cabin?" Katherine had been pondering this question. "There's nothing for us there except memories and hardship, I was thinking." Helena might offer opportunities. I could find work as a seamstress or cook. The children could attend school. It's a growing town, Matthew agreed, but starting over isn't easy. We've done it before. She hesitated. When does your drive reach Helena? 3 weeks if the weather holds. Matthew's eyes never left her face. You thinking of traveling with the drive? Would that be possible? He considered this. Not traditional, having a woman and children along, but you've already proven your worth around camp and the men adore Thomas and Emma. A smile touched his lips. Besides, I'm trail boss. My word carries weight. I wouldn't want to cause problems, you won't. His certainty was comforting. Truth is, Katherine, having you here has improved morale. Men are behaving better, working harder, even eating better thanks to your help with the cooking. The cattle drive began 3 days later. Katherine had never witnessed anything like it. 2,000 cattle stretching across the plains, guided by 30 cowboys who worked from dawn until dusk. The massive chuck wagon she now helped operate rolled along a parallel course, setting up camp each evening before the herd arrived. Emma, fully recovered, rode perched on the wagon seat beside her mother, wide-eyed at the adventure. Thomas alternated between helping with camp duties and riding alongside one of the older cowboys who had taken him under his wing, teaching him to guide the gentle mare Matthew had assigned him. Katherine found herself watching Matthew whenever the opportunity arose. He was transformed in his element, confident, commanding, seemingly tireless as he rode from one end of the herd to the other, solving problems before they arose, encouraging men when their spirits flagged. Yet each evening, no matter how exhausting the day, he made time to sit with her family, to ask about Emma's progress or admire Thomas's growing skills. 2 weeks into the drive, disaster struck. A sudden thunderstorm spooked the herd at dusk, triggering a stampede that sent cattle crashing through the half-established camp. Katherine grabbed Emma and ran for the safety of the chuck wagon, screaming for Thomas, who had been helping to unload supplies. Matthew appeared as if conjured. Thomas clutched securely before him on his horse. He deposited the boy with Katherine, then wheeled his mount. "Stay in the wagon," he shouted over the thunder of hooves and rain. "Don't come out until I return." Katherine watched in terror as he rode directly into the chaos, joining the other cowboys attempting to turn the stampede. Lightning illuminated the scene in stark flashes, men and horses moving like dancers among the deadly horns and hooves, risking everything to prevent the complete loss of the herd. Hours passed. The storm subsided, but Katherine remained in the wagon with her children, listening to distant shouts and the occasional gunshot. Thomas eventually fell asleep, but Emma clung to her mother, trembling. "Is Mr. Matthew going to die?" the girl whispered. Katherine stroked her daughter's hair. "No, sweetheart, he's very good at his job and he's very brave." Like Papa was supposed to be brave, the innocent question pierced Katherine's heart. "Your father was brave in his own way," she said carefully. "But sometimes bravery means staying instead of leaving." Near dawn, riders began returning to the damaged camp. Katherine counted each man, her anxiety mounting as familiar faces appeared but not the one she most longed to see. Finally, when hope was nearly exhausted, a lone horse approached from the east. Matthew slid from the saddle, mud-covered and bloodied but upright. Katherine rushed to him, propriety forgotten. "You're hurt," she said, noting the gash across his forehead. "Just a scratch. Horse slipped in the mud, threw me into a thicket." His eyes searched hers. "The children, safe." Frightened but unharmed, Katherine resisted the urge to touch his face to assure herself he was truly whole. The herd, lost about 200 head, could have been worse. He swayed slightly, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "Need to check on the men. The men are fine," she interrupted firmly. "You're dead on your feet. Come, let me tend that wound." To her surprise, he acquiesced without argument, following her to the medical wagon where Doc Murphy had already treated several injured cowboys. The old doctor cleaned Matthew's wound, pronounced it minor, and moved on to more serious cases, leaving Katherine to apply the bandage. As she worked, Matthew captured her wrist gently. "I was worried about you when the cattle came through camp," his voice roughened. "I thought I might lose you all." The naked emotion in his words made Katherine's hands still. "We were safe thanks to you." "No, thanks to dumb luck. I should have seen the signs made camp farther from the herd." Self-recrimination lined his face. "I got careless, Matthew." She rarely used his given name, and it caught his attention. No one can control nature, not the weather, not the cattle's fear. You did everything possible. His fingers tightened slightly around her wrist, his thumb brushing over her pulse point. I've been alone a long time, Katherine. Suited me fine until recently. His eyes, despite his exhaustion, were clear and intent. Now I find myself thinking about what comes after this drive, about Helena and what might be possible there. Catherine's heart quickened. What might be possible? A fresh start, for all of us maybe. He released her wrist, suddenly uncertain. Unless I'm reading things wrong. You're not, she whispered, courage rising from some deep place within her. Reading things wrong, I mean. The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise after the darkest night. Good, that's good. The remainder of the drive passed without major incident. The lost cattle were counted as an acceptable loss, and the Cattlemen's Association representatives were pleased with Matthew's handling of the crisis. As Helena appeared on the horizon, Katherine felt both trepidation and anticipation building. The cattle were delivered to the stockyards, the men paid their wages, and the camp disbanded with handshakes and promises to ride together again. Katherine and the children moved temporarily into a boarding house, while Matthew completed his business with the association. On their third evening in Helena, Matthew appeared at the boarding house with an unexpected proposal. I'd like to show you something, he said, helping Katherine into a rented buggy while the children bounced excitedly in the back seat. It's a short drive. He guided the horses to the outskirts of town, where the buildings gave way to scattered homesteads. Finally, he stopped before a modest but well-maintained property, a white clapboard house with a broad porch, a barn, and several fenced pastures where horses grazed. What is this place? Katherine asked, taking in the smoke curling from the chimney, the vegetable garden at the side of the house. Matthew helped her down from the buggy. Peterson's place, or it was until yesterday, old man's retiring, moving to California to live with his daughter. He watched her face carefully. I bought it, with my trail boss earnings and savings. Katherine stared at him, uncomprehending. You bought a ranch, but you're always moving, he corrected gently. Maybe it's time to stop, plant some roots. He gestured toward the house. Peterson ran a horse breeding operation here. Quality stock, good reputation, I know horses, could make a decent living. Thomas had already run to the fence to admire the horses. Emma clutched Katherine's skirts, wide-eyed at the pretty house. It's a wonderful opportunity for you, Katherine said carefully. Matthew took a deep breath. I'm hoping it might be an opportunity for all of us. The world seemed to still. What are you saying, Matthew? He removed his hat, holding it before him like a shield. I'm not a man of fancy words, Katherine, but these past weeks, getting to know you, Thomas, Emma, it's shown me everything I've been missing. He met her eyes directly. I love you, all of you, and if you'd consider it, I'd like to build a life here together. Matthew, Katherine began, but he pressed on. I know it's sudden, know you've been hurt before. But I swear to you, Katherine Walsh, if you give me the chance, I'll spend every day making sure you and those children never know hunger or fear again. Not as long as I draw breath. Tears filled Katherine's eyes. I don't know what to say you'll think about it. He took her hand. We could start slow. You could stay in town, find that seamstress work you mentioned. I'll court you proper. Show you I mean every word. Katherine looked at the hopeful faces of her children, then back to this man who had rescued them from the brink of despair. In his eyes, she saw not the wild dreams that had lured Jacob away, but solid promises grounded in reality. I don't need time, she said quietly, or a long courtship. I've seen your character, Matthew Vance, seen how you treat those weaker than yourself, how you handle responsibility. She squeezed his hand. The children need a father who won't disappear when times get hard, and her voice wavered, I need a partner who understands that love means staying. Hope bloomed across Matthew's face. Is that a yes? It's a yes, Katherine confirmed. Though there are practicalities to consider, her words were cut short as Matthew swept her into a gentle embrace, his lips finding hers in a kiss that spoke of promise, tenderness, and a future bright with possibility. When they parted, both were breathless. Mama, Thomas called. Are we going to live here with Mr. Matthew? Katherine looked up at Matthew, whose arm remained around her waist. What do you think, Mr. Vance? Do we have room for 2 energetic children and their mother? I think, Matthew said, his voice husky with emotion, that this house has been waiting for a family to make it a home. The next weeks passed in a whirlwind. Matthew and Katherine were married by the local judge in a simple ceremony, with Thomas proudly standing as best man and Emma scattering wildflowers before her mother. The ranch slowly transformed with Katherine's touch curtains at the windows, quilts on the beds, the scent of home-baked bread filling the kitchen. Matthew proved as skilled with horses as he'd claimed. Buyers from as far as California came to purchase his stock, and by the first snowfall, the ranch was turning a steady profit. Katherine established a small business sewing clothes for Helena's growing population, allowing her to contribute while remaining close to home. Thomas thrived under Matthew's tutelage, learning to ride, rope, and care for the horses. Emma, her health fully restored, started school in town and returned each day bubbling with new knowledge. The hollow cheeks and haunted eyes that had marked both children gradually disappeared, replaced by robust health and boundless energy. On Christmas Eve, 6 months after their arrival in Helena, Katherine and Matthew sat before the fireplace in their cozy parlor. The children had gone to bed, stockings hung with eager anticipation for morning. "Happy?" Matthew asked, his arm around his wife's shoulders. Katherine leaned into his embrace. "Beyond anything I imagined possible a year ago." She took his hand, guiding it to rest on her slightly rounded belly. "And even more happiness to come." Matthew's eyes widened. "Are you certain? Doctor confirmed it yesterday." Katherine smiled at his wonderment. "The baby should arrive in early summer." Matthew pressed his lips to her temple, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for trusting me. For giving me this family. You gave us life, Matthew. When you found us at that cabin, we were at the end of our rope." "No," he corrected gently. "You were surviving. You would have found a way, Katherine. You're the strongest person I've ever known." She thought of those desperate days of digging in barren soil while her children cried from hunger. Perhaps, but it would have been a half-life at best. She twisted to look into his eyes. "You didn't just feed us or fix our roof. You restored our hope." Matthew drew her closer. "And you gave me something I'd stopped believing in: a home, a place to belong." Outside, snow began to fall, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. Inside, the fire crackled cheerfully, illuminating the simple decorations the family had crafted together: pine boughs, paper stars, strings of dried berries. On the table lay Matthew's latest project: wooden horses he'd carved for the children, and a cradle he'd begun for the coming baby. "I was thinking," Matthew said, watching the flames, "when spring comes, we should plant an orchard. Apple trees take years to bear fruit, but they'll grow with our family," Katherine finished for him, "for our children and someday their children." "Exactly," he smiled. "No more living day to day. We're building something that will last." Katherine thought of the journey that had brought them here, from the depths of desperation to this moment of contentment. The road had been hard, marked with loss and grief, but it had led to this improbable joy. "I love you, Matthew Vance," she said simply. His answer was in his kiss, in the gentle strength of his embrace, in the home they had created together. Outside, the Montana winter raged, but within these walls, spring had already arrived, a season of rebirth, of promises kept, of hunger banished not just from the body but from the soul. As they climbed the stairs to their bedroom, Katherine paused at the children's door, opening it quietly to check on them. Thomas and Emma slept peacefully, their faces relaxed in the security that comes from knowing tomorrow's needs are already met. Matthew's hand found hers in the darkness, squeezing gently. In that moment, Katherine knew with absolute certainty that the desperate woman who had once knelt in barren soil, pleading for a single potato, was gone forever. In her place stood a woman surrounded by love, facing a future limited only by the horizons of hope. And those horizons, like the Montana sky, stretched endlessly before them.